This SIGGRAPH presentation about DLSS 5 is probably what Nvidia should have led with because it has way more detail about how developers can actually control DLSS 5, demonstrating what those controls look like happening live. So while I'm sure this is still going to be incredibly controversial, at least I think the arguments about it will be more informed. So there's that. They're also still promising that it is coming this fall and that it's targeting running on a single GPU, when remember their original demonstration was apparently running on two 5090s. So when they say running on a single GPU, is that one 5090 and at a low frame rate? I'm like, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, although they do talk about performance a little bit. They talk about artistic intent, and we'll mention all of that. I do want us to talk about well, actually just take a look at this presentation. So I was watching it at 2x speed, so I should probably slow that down for you guys, because this is really done in video. So I think the best way to show you is to show you. Now, this video is only available at 1080p as its maximum quality, so I do apologize for that. That's best I can do because all I can find is this SIGGRAPH presentation video. But so what they're showing here is the DLSS5 developer controls running live, controlling things like structural intensity, tone intensity, and also there are 3 different models currently, I wonder if they'll add more, that you can choose from that give different image outputs, and apparently you're not locked into one particular one in a game. You can use it at different times in the same game, etc. So let's actually just listen and watch some of this, and I'll give my thoughts as well.
As you can see in this frame here, we have different models, model A, B, C. They have different output because they're trained on different parameters. When a developer picks a model, you're not locked into one. And the theme that you're going to see in all my presentation here is that you can sort of mix and match whatever you want. So picking a specific model does not lock your whole game, for example, into one. You can pick a model for a scene, a model for a different scene, a model for a cutscene. So you can pick whatever suits you.
So, like I said, there's a few different models. They're showing them there. They have differences in their output. And again, I guess just different training data, different parameters in there. So there's some control over the scene. Now, this already brings up one issue I have with all of this, which is if this is only running on Nvidia GPUs and presumably, at least initially, only on more powerful ones, but we'll have to see. Maybe it runs fine on less powerful ones. They didn't specify the level of hardware. I'm wondering, how much developer time and resources do developers want to put into picking the right model for each scene and tweaking all of it? So it's nice to have these controls, but remember, having all of that control and tweaking all of that costs developer time, which is also developer budget. So that's one of these issues with these proprietary vendor-locked technologies is, especially if it starts like in other words, implementing DLSS, 1 through 4.5, I don't think is necessarily as resource intensive as going through scene by scene, playing with all of these controls. So it's really good to see these, but I do want to just mention, I'm going to give kind of my reactions to these as more control, great, also more resource and developer time intensive for a proprietary technology that only some people are going to be seeing and accessing.
Then some more global controls. We have structure intensity as well as tone intensity. So structure intensity is modulating the high frequency detail of the frame, and tone intensity is modulating the low frequency detail of the frame. A simpler way to think about it is structure intensity is basically adding things like better ambient occlusion, better subsurface scattering, and better reflections.
Okay, ambient occlusion, subsurface scattering, reflection. So structure intensity is high frequency detail.
Whereas tone intensity is a bit more expressive and is impacting the lighting, is enhancing the lighting. As you can see, if we move the tone slider, it's changing the colors because it's effectively changing the subsurface scattering and the lighting. So these are global controls that...
Okay, so the tone intensity, more about the colors and lighting. So it's just 2 sliders. You can see they do have a lot of impact on the frame that we're getting, what we end up seeing. So there's a lot of control there, but it seems like you said, it's kind of controlling high frequency detail and low frequency detail, which are encompass more than one thing. So, that's one of those things where if you gave more individual control to each of those elements within it, even if you could, that would then be even more developer time. So this does feel like one of those issues where the more control you get, the more time you might spend having to use them. So it's kind of one of those pros and cons things, I guess. But you do see that those sliders do offer a lot of change to what the output image is showing.
Again, enhance the whole frame. Now, I'm going to show you some controls that we have. There's two different levels of controls. There's controls that come from the engine side and controls that come from the model side. Because DLSS 5 is a smart model, it understands what's in the frame. So this, for example, is a model automasking. The model understands the character, the base character itself, and we can use the slider to control the intensity at which DLSS 5 is being applied just on the base character, as you can see.
Okay, so that's interesting. So again, think about that from the game developer time side of things. It looks like it's automatically able to infer what the character is, and then decide that then you can mask that off separately, right? So I think a lot of the feedback to the initial DLSS 5 reveal was that, what it did to the lighting of certain environment scenes. I think some people were, I would say there were still positive and negative reactions to it, but I felt like the percentage of comments I saw about lighting on foliage and bringing in shadows to things in the background seemed to at least skew a higher degree percentage positive. Whereas when it was applying to characters, I think there was a lot of that feeling of, this reminds me too much of AI slop I see all over, the internet now, and I don't want that in my feed, I don't want that in my game. So if it's automatically able to detect character faces, and assuming it does that accurately all the time automatically, because again, think about the developer side of things, it is nice that they could maybe turn it down or off automatically on character faces without hopefully having to do a bunch of work. Although I'm curious, they're demonstrating this in a scene where it's probably pretty easy for a model to tell what the character is. I'm curious in a larger scene with crowds and things like that, are all the people in the crowds included in that? Is that inferred automatically? So anyway, just other thoughts that are popping into mind when I look at these controls. But it does look nice that it could automatically tell what the character face is, and hopefully that works accurately 100% of the time, and then control that separately than the rest of the scene.
See, and this is coming entirely from the model side. I want to show you one more example of that. In this example, DLSS 5 is off on the environment, and we're just turning it on, again, just for the character, because the model understands which one is the character. So this is coming entirely from the model side, because the model understands.
I'm also noticing that it seems to be able to tell what is the character's face and skin, because notice it noticed the neck down here as being distinct from the character's clothing. So that's interesting, where it seems like it can distinguish that, which I guess is also useful. And you would hope, again, that in more complex scenes, it would be continuing to do that accurately 100% of the time. Because if it sometimes missed, that would be probably noticeable in as you played.
The semantics of the scene.
Okay. All right. Good talk. Okay. All right, here we go.
What I'm going to show you here is an example of the same.
Okay, so we're looking at the same model, Model B, but showing different levels of structural intensity. I'm not going to watch this whole thing. I will link this in the video description. So this is showing the differences in the model. So we have Model A, Model B, and Model C, and all of them set to the same structural intensity. So you get to have a feeling for the differences in outputs you get from those different models. As far as I can tell here, they never really explained a feel for each model, what it's supposed to do. They just said they are different with different parameters. So I guess you could just try them out as a developer and see what you thought was best. And again, you could control that, I guess, scene by scene or different ones in cutscenes. That kind of thing. Like I said, I'm imagining additional developer work time on that, if that's necessary. Also, the more I see all of this and those controls and things, the more I'm reminded how my initial reaction to all of this was, I don't like it being called DLSS, and I almost felt like it would be cooler to see this almost like in the filters tab in the Nvidia app, or maybe as an option in a game setting where this would be a cool way to gamers like to mod things, right? So if this was available just as a fun thing to play around with, but not calling it DLSS, which we think of as like a performance enhancing tool that has a ground truth image that it's trying to replicate just from a lower, pixel resolution, but you have a ground truth target. This feels like a very different thing. So again, I could imagine myself in my Nvidia app overlay choosing to enhance some old game and choose between the different models and the intensity for my personal preferences. That sounds kind of like a cool modding sort of thing, whereas this just feels very different than what's branded under DLSS previously, which felt like performance enhancing technologies that had a ground truth image to try to replicate, as opposed to generate something beyond the ground truth image. So anyway, just thoughts that are popping up as we see this.
But with the different models. Again, different models give different outputs because of the training parameters being different.
So yeah, the training parameters are different. Okay, so like I said, though, I think a lot of people have that initial reaction to some of the faces, even if they do look more photorealistic. I think sometimes they can look more of that like generically over average to attractive social media post with that just AI. Somehow it just looks a little off. You can spot it kind of look. And again, hopefully they can mask those things and turn them down. But looking at it applied to non-characters, it'll be interesting if it can just add in better shadowing and reflections and lighting, etc. So we get some demonstrations of that here.
It's also enhancing the rest of the scene. So in this example here, okay, let's say we want to, again, enhance the whole scene. But okay, actually, we don't want to do that. Let's say we want to enhance specific items in the scene. These are controls that come from the engine side. Here we've masked, for instance, the pitcher, the grapes, and the bottles.
Okay, I think this is important to note here because they're saying that this is coming from the engine side. So in your game engine, you could distinguish between the pitcher, the grapes, and the bottles. This doesn't sound like the auto masking where the model understood what the character's face was. So this seems cool, but this also, again, I'm thinking developer time involved in this. Right, like I said, proprietary thing, only some people using this, especially initially. So, like I said, pros and cons on additional control and this having to be run in the game engine itself, etc.
And these are implemented on the engine side, and you can mask as you see fit. So you can have as many masks as you want. And as you can see, we can control the sliders independently. Each item can be adjusted in intensity and tone completely independently from each other. So you can completely art direct whatever item in the scene you basically want DLSS 5 to enhance or not enhance. And one more example from one of our scenes. Here, we have grouped the bottom part, as you can see, the whole cutting board, the props at the top, and again, completely
okay, yeah, so it looks like they have two different groups, but again, this seems to be coming from the engine side, so the engine, again, you'd have to be doing this and controlling a lot of it separately. Now let's see what it does.
Being affected, here we can control, you can see DLSS 5 is adding better reflections, as you can see.
I mean, so looking at something like this, again, there's the whole other issue of just your thoughts on generative AI being part of game development and how much this goes into that. But if I'm just looking at evaluating the final output image, when I see it add in what does appear to me more realistic shadowing to this, it certainly does to me look like if I'm just being honest here and not just picking apart anything I can.
As you can see the whole cutting board, the props at the top.
Like I said, I feel like it is making that more realistic with the shadowing there compared to it being off. We could take a look at it again.
Completely masked, the rest of the environment is not being affected. Here we can control, you can see DLSS 5 is adding better reflections. As you can see, better contact shadows into the ground. For the bottles, you'll see much better translucency in the bottle, better metal reflections. And those are just the elements that we're uplifting without touching the rest of the scene. Again, tone intensity, structure, everything can be tweaked as developed.
Now, I do wonder, again, it's neat to have that individualized control. Also, though, I wonder if like certain things getting the more realistic shadowing than others might stand out. So, but I guess you could maybe apply it to everything, but control the intensity of each individually. But again, now I'm thinking about the developer time on that. But this does seem to have a lot more individualized control than I may have thought with their initial reveal. So I'm glad that we're at least getting more informed details about how exactly all of this is working. But like I said, this one is showing stuff that has to be done through the engine as opposed to like the auto mask of recognizing the character face.
As the developer sees fit. And last but not least, what I want to show you is how DLSS 5 can enhance the whole environment, in this case, the foliage scene. And as you can see, this scene looks very nice. It is a ray trace scene, but it still looks a little bit plasticky. And when we turn DLSS 5 on, as you can see, the plants come to life, and they look really photoreal. And that's because DLSS 5 is adding subsurface scattering. And that's something that, as you know, traditionally would be incredibly expensive to do in traditional rendering. And DLSS 5 is taking the image to the next level. Again, here we could control the intensity that we wish fully. So,
okay, so overall, like I said, lots of controversial things about AI use in game development and AI in general. If I try to take this just as more, okay, just reacting honestly to the kinds of images that we're seeing and the new information that we got, it is cool to see all of the types of control that are available. I do think, you know, when I'm looking at just the quality of the output image that we're getting, when I'm looking at it adding in the shadowing and subsurface scattering and reflections, et cetera, to the environmental scenes, to my eye, it looks more clearly just more photoreal, as opposed to when I see the character faces, they can look more photoreal, but you know, humans looking at faces, we're just more triggered by that uncanny valley weirdness, and we're also seeing so much AI-generated faces and things like that, that a lot of us are just picking that out instantly and having a negative feeling to it. So I don't know, and having that masking ability, anyway, this is interesting. So I think we're at least more informed on what exactly is happening here. I'm sure this is still incredibly going to be controversial. And like I said, I think just calling this DLSS in and of itself, I really don't like that idea because it feels very different than what has been DLSS in the past. And then getting into this with you know, going into the engine, controlling each of those things separately and all of that. This almost feels like it's more trying to look at just a different way of rendering games as part of a game engine and development process, which is interesting. But if it's done in a proprietary manner with proprietary technology only usable by certain people, rather than more as just like a thing that all GPUs with some AI inferencing ability can do, I don't like that. If this does end up being like a move forward in, you know, game development, et cetera, it being vendor locked, I think is also a real concern here, especially with how much maybe developer time would be needed to be implemented on it. If you're really going to take advantage of all of those artistic controls that you've been given. So anyway, that's most of the information we got here. There was a little bit of an intro thing talking about the idea of preserving artistic intent, how they're trying to control, lock out what the model is allowed to change, all of that. But I don't feel like we got a lot more detail. What we got more was these, you know, like I said, those demonstrations of the individual controls that we had. They also talked a little bit about the concern of image consistency from frame to frame, because because what this is doing, it is taking one 2D frame at a time, and then it is looking at that, applying the DLSS 5 model before it does it to the next one, and it doesn't look at multiple frames. So you could have a concern over frame-to-frame consistency as you play the game, or would there be shimmering or temporal instability? They're claiming that because they have access to motion vectors, that stability issue is solved. But I will also say that these demonstrations that we're seeing here are still fairly static. And in the initial DLSS 5 reveal, there was like the soccer soccer video, where if you looked at it frame by frame, there was a lot of weird warping and stuff. Now, there was some discussion over whether the weirdness was frame generation artifacts, and they were also running frame generation on top of the DLSS 5 model. And I don't think that we ever got any clarification on that. So while they're claiming that motion vectors solve the frame-to-frame consistency, like I said, I think when we actually get hands-on and faster-paced stuff, they said this is coming in the fall still. That's still their target release date, so I guess we'll get to try it out soon enough. And then they did also talk about performance. Now, they're saying that it should get down to running on a single GPU, but they didn't clarify, is it just a 5090 and at what frame rate? They mentioned trying to run at 60 frames per second, but they didn't actually give any particular target for performance on specific GPUs, etc. Now, they said that the main way that they're able to get this generation model to run a lot quicker than traditional just generative models is that this isn't general. Like, it can't do a lot of things. By limiting the types of outputs that it can give and what it's focusing on in the scene, specifically what they're calling just enhancing the photorealism of the scene, by limiting what it's doing, it actually improves its efficiency. It needs less VRAM and less processing time than if you were just like typing a prompt into just a normal generative AI. So they said that's how they're working on performance, but they still haven't really specified what exactly that performance will look like when we get it. So I've showed you most of the interesting stuff here. There's a lot of other things in the SIGGRAPH presentation, but I think you got most of the useful new information about DLSS 5 here, but I will link the source in the video description. Like I said, this had to be a little more of a live react to this kind of video because I've got people coming over in a few minutes, so I need to publish this thing and get to that. So still curious what your opinions are on DLSS 5 from what we've seen so far. We certainly have a lot more information about it to have more informed opinions, but I'm sure that there's still going to be a lot of opinions. So it'll be interesting to see if and when we actually get this. They're saying the fall and what that performance will look like. And like I said, a lot of the concerns I have are still around the proprietary nature, if this is trying to be how they're moving forward with rendering, etc. But I think I'm just rambling and repeating myself now. So let's end the video. Hope you all have an excellent day.